Yeah. And yeah, you have questions, go ahead and just put this into the chat. Great questions about strawberries and lettuce and year-round gardening. So that's great questions to start off. I'm just going to do a quick intro of why we're here today and how we could do this, and then we will dive in. Okay, we just went over this. Julia here with the Tilth Alliance, who's going to be a great teacher for us. And I'm Amanda Miller. That's my whole thing. And that is me. I'm the executive director of the South King Tool Library. Oh, my brain is not working, but that's okay. That's the tool library over here, that big blue thing out of recycled shipping containers in Federal Way. If you don't know what a tool library is, and I'm really glad you're here today, but first things first, thank you to our sponsors, our funders through the Department of Ecology and EPA for allowing us to bring this class to you for free. And yeah, I wanted to make sure to invite you guys. I can put the address again into the chat, but we have some in-person workshops coming up, some really great opportunities as well for you guys to connect with us. Our Repair Cafe is coming up on June 10th, which is an opportunity to bring broken things to get them fixed for free. Everything from shoes, clothes, toys, computers, lawnmowers, well, within reason, things that aren't too large or leaking or anything too toxic, but we accept your challenges. Vacuums, lamps are some of the most popular items. We also have a work party tomorrow and then another one at the end of June, and an in-person workshop with Tilth Alliance on Saturday, June 3rd. And more things throughout the summer, so check that. And then where are my pictures? There they are. All right. This is our luscious, glorious, beautiful, it doesn't quite look like that yet, demonstration rain garden. In the back of the South King Tool Library, we have this garden that we worked with Tilth Alliance and Stone Soup to bring to Federal Way. And here are just some ideas about as you approach your yard care, home care, community space care, you know, container building goals, what kind of tools you can borrow, greener lawns, greener homes, greener life, all that, all the things. And our hours here on the other side here. Other suggestions are to skip the gym, you know, cancel your gym membership, save some money, do some manual labor for exercise, as it were, get out there in the sunshine. Lots of tools to encourage that. And then let's see, what's next? Yes, a great reason to do this is to reduce waste, reduce consumption, and help to reduce the embodied carbon that goes into everyone owning all these items themselves. So the idea of the tool library is to share the abundance that we have in already manufactured goods. Just borrowing these 6 tools that you could commonly use in a yard would save about 370 pounds of embodied carbon. And those 6 tools, I think I rounded down, saves 15 gallons of gas, 150 pounds of coal burned, the equivalent of almost 6 trash bags of waste recycled, and some other pretty cool statistics there. 2 saplings that were 10 years old. So just imagine the impact you can make the more that you borrow instead of buy. Oops, there we go. Let's see. And yeah, we hope that you can join us, come by the tool library, learn more about our programs, learn more about our demonstration rain garden, and work in our beautiful space, learn about some of these things. And I think that's all I have. Are there more? Let's see, get out of here. Bear with me. That's it. I'm going to switch over and help drive for Miss Julia. But thank you guys for joining us today. Julia, please introduce yourself to our class here.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Julia Busini, and I work for the Garden Hotline, which is through Tilth Alliance. Tilth Alliance, if you aren't familiar, is a nonprofit in the Seattle, Washington city and state region with tons of different programming that has to do with gardening, farming, food equity, all that good stuff. I work on the natural yard care team, and so one of our projects is the Garden Hotline. So at the end, I believe we'll have a slide with our information, but we really do have a hotline, so you can go ahead and call us or send us emails. Monday through Saturday, 9 to 5, we'll be in the office, hanging out at the desk, answering people's questions. And the email is a great resource because you can send us photos and we can help you kind of plan for your space, diagnose any diseases or possible pests that are causing trouble in your garden, and all that good stuff. So this class is all about container gardening. In King County and the Seattle area, tons of us are urban dwellers or just have limited space when it comes to outside space for gardening. And container gardening is a really great option to maximize that small space and to get your hands in the dirt, grow some food, and learn all about soil and plants and seeing how it all grows together. So next slide, or can I? So when you're getting started with your container gardening, you want to pick a spot that's going to do the best for growing vegetables or flowers or herbs, whatever you decide you want to do. For edible gardening, you really want to get at least 6 hours of sun. Anywhere from that 6 to 8 plus range is amazing. Specifically, if you're going to be wanting to grow hot weather crops like tomatoes and eggplants and hot peppers, those are going to need as much sun as possible. That way that they can, produce and grow and do the best that they can. Some things like greens and herbs can be a bit more shade tolerant. So if you're not quite at that 6 hour range, it's still definitely worth it to try. When you're picking your garden space, it's also important to note and place it near a water source. If your hose is in the front, but your, container garden is up on a balcony, it's going to be very difficult to do watering and, it can become a chore. And healthy plants are going to be the most resistant to any sort of disease or pest damage. So we want to make sure that we're watering and taking care of our plants. So good to make sure that that water source is easy to get to. You also want to have tools for harvesting and gardening. So, if you have a lot of weeds growing in your neighborhood, there's a lot of weed seeds in the air and they make their way into your containers. You want to be able to have tools to remove them or harvest that make that easy for you. And then if you're gardening through the winter, you want to make sure that site is getting direct sun, just because we have such cold winters here, and those sunny days are really going to be super important for whatever plants you have overwintering or trying to grow throughout the winter. Next slide. So when you are starting to make your container garden, there's 2 ways you can go about it. You can do raised beds, which are usually a bit larger in size. You can do anything from, 1.5 feet by 3 feet, or you can go as big as, just as much as your space allows for. I think that, you want to make sure that when you're building raised beds that you are factoring how you will be tending to the garden, whether you are able to reach into the bed, if you want to step into the bed, and making sure that it's comfortable for you and accessible. Containers are great as well. You can, they're really helpful if you have very small space, a balcony, being able to maximize what you are growing in a small space. Especially for a lot of us, we have balconies, and so you can really grow a lot on a small balcony with, a smaller raised bed or small containers. And I'm sure through like neighborhood, I've gotten tons of pots and containers from like my free and for sale neighborhood groups and all that good stuff. So people are always getting rid of containers. So if you are ever interested, there's always a good place to look. Just get in a pot and you can grow tomatoes and you can grow tons of stuff in containers, and you can grow multiple things in containers at once and really maximize that space. So next slide. So when you are starting to create your container garden, you want to start to consider a few different things. When you are, we'll get into this in the next slide, but building material can be very important. What kind of plastic, what kind of wood that we're working with, how durable this will be over time, and how it will fare for your health and the health of your plants. Soil choice is also very important. Organic gardening is great. It's not always accessible, but we do love to support organic soil and compost, and making sure that we are getting soil that has good drainage. That's going to be super important in maintaining the health of our plants and containers. You want to make sure that you have watering tools, and that those watering tools are safe. No hoses with lead in them, or other things that we'll get into in other slides. Ergonomic tools. Yeah, I want to make sure that you're checking in with your body and doing what is accessible for and comfortable for you. There's tons of great things that you can get, like kneeling pads, or you can get these like little chairs that are perfect for small spaces, for getting in and around, that provide a lot of support. Things that have different handles and things that are going to put so much stress on your wrist. And then when it comes to things like fertilizers and pesticides, thinking about how organic versus synthetic, and even organic pesticides can have some concerns for your health and the health of your local ecosystem, your pets, all that good stuff.
I had a question for you, Julia,
Oh,
about building materials, containers, some of the things you mentioned, like lead testing and leaching and things like that, with like different materials that we could use. Is there anything that you definitely suggest avoiding? And then another question about like the accessibility aspect of, so many DIY like things. We were just talking about that. Is there anything to definitely avoid, or definitely you think is always a good idea to incorporate?
Yeah. So we'll get into a little bit more as we go on. I'll revisit this question at the end, but we will go through building materials in the next slide, I believe.
Perfect.
Cool. And then as far as DIYs, like things that I would say yes or no to, or just like trends in gardening.
Yeah. Or is there anything that's like, I keep my eggshells, and like I just put them everywhere and in my garden, and like I feel like that's a safe bet. At coffee grounds, on the other hand, I've come to learn like that was my go-to also, but that can be really acidic and can burn some roots and cannot be as good for the pH of things. So I'm sure you're going to cover lots of it. It popped into my brain.
Okay, got it. Like myth busting a little bit.
Yeah.
I think a fun DIY that is really great is making like a yeast or a beer trap for slugs. This we won't mention in the slides, but I do recommend it to a lot of callers. If you have a lot of slugs in your yard or your garden, you can take a little cup, like a little yogurt cup, and poke some holes around, and then fill it like 2/3 of the way, or like just below your holes that you made, and fill it with yeast and water or beer if you like, and it'll attract the slugs. Similar things for earwigs as well. You can do just sugar and water, I believe, this will attract them. So if you have a lot of those in your yard, those are great. I'll try to think of some more as we go through, but that's like on top of my head, some good ones. But as far as like don'ts, I can't think of anything quite yet, but I'll keep thinking about it in the back as we go. But yeah, we can keep going. So here I'm going to go through the building material choices and some of those like risks that we want to avoid. We can keep going. So when it comes to building a raised bed, typically most people use wood. There's many other things you can use, like concrete, metal, stone. when using wood, it's important to use non-treated wood. A lot of older wood was pressure treated with and has like arsenic in it. And so that's a risk for leaching into your soil. I think in the mid 2000s, they stopped doing the same kind of pressure treating with arsenic, but it still is pressure treated with chemicals. I'm not quite sure what those are now, but I was recently looking into it. So it's not as big of a risk anymore, but we do recommend that you use cedar or juniper because they are much longer lasting. Cedar is a naturally rot resistant wood, one of our native trees here in the Pacific Northwest. So it's perfect for outside and surviving our rainy season here. So it can be a bit more expensive, but personally, like when I built my garden beds, I just bought cedar fencing boards, which are much thinner than like cedar. This is I saw on TikTok as a gardening hack, but it was great and they're working great. But these cedar fencing boards are only like $4 a piece, and they're 5 feet long versus like $20 for a 5-foot long board. So, I built my whole garden bed for $20 in terms of wood versus like 100. So, I would recommend that. There's little hacks in there. But yeah, so using those cedar and juniper versus treated wood. When it comes to using concrete, you want to avoid using asphalt because some of the aggregates inside asphalt can contain metals. So you want to not use asphalt because that can also leach into your soil, some heavy metals, which we don't want because plants can easily take those up from the soil. But yes, so you can use blocks of concrete. You could use things from walkways, driveways, patios. I'm sure that second-use building materials, I believe in Seattle is what it's called. I'm sure they have like lots of these kinds of materials available.
There's a place called I think Reuse too, and there's a second use in Tacoma as well, which is cool.
Yeah, great. Second option is galvanized stock tanks. And these are really great because they come in tons of sizes. So you can get this galvanized steel, which you can get it from Home Depot. You can get it from, Lowe's, your local hardware store. It's really accessible to find and not too expensive. And it will last quite a long time. And they have tons of shapes and sizes that can fit most spaces. So those are one note with those. And we'll talk about this a little bit more with containers, but drainage is super important. So with the stock tanks, you're going to want to maybe rent a drill from the tool library and do, drill some holes at the bottom to allow for drainage. And then lastly, stone. You can use stacked rocks, which we'll see photos of. And just basically you can use anything that you can create a barrier around and then fill with soil, and you're not going to lose the majority of that soil. But you can really get creative with what you have and what you have access to and what you could crowdsource from people that you know or people you don't know but live in your community. And you can build a raised bed out of it. Next slide.
I was going to just say we actually have one of those galvanized as a raised bed that we worked with Tilth to bring in here, and we used a hole saw and actually had to step up things. It was not what the designers actually thought. They just thought a hole saw kit would go in. So I have experience doing that. I can direct you to the right.
Amazing. And how long have you had the galvanized steel tub for?
We probably had it for 2.5, almost 3 years. It's in its 4th rotation of crops. So we tried to do summer, winter stuff, and it missed a cycle. So right now it has horseradish and dill in it because
nice.
I needed to stay in a container, and I like horseradish. And we had a bunch of it.
Amazing. So the next couple slides will just be some photos. So here, and this is an example of a raised bed. Just built with some wood. Classic, and there's some remay, some floating row cover over that bed on the left, which is great for keeping your soil intact over the winter. And next slide.
And avoiding those things that squirrels like to bury. That's a great tip if you cover your beds over winter to make sure things don't appear magically.
So then we have some concrete that someone built a bed out of. And I think they have some just like bricks on the bottom. And then they have that stone around. Keep going. This one is a little bit, they probably purchased a lot of those stones or, found them in a set, but, it could be very aesthetically pleasing to use things like stone. Next slide. And then those are those galvanized steel stock tanks that we're talking about. So yeah, they have like those longer ones, some more circular ones, and they even have like smaller ones that you could probably fit on a balcony. Keep going. More examples of some stone with some lettuce growing in it. And this is also great, like if you already have this kind of infrastructure in your apartment building, condo complex, in your home, like I feel like a lot of these things are really common landscape design in homes all over, and you could really take out ornamental plants and do edible gardening. So just, it might feel like, oh, because there's shrubs in there, I have to leave them there, or like that's the, they grow best there, I couldn't grow vegetables there. Like, no, you can grow vegetables anywhere, pretty much anywhere. Next slide. Just more examples of things you could buy. This one has some height on it, so if like bending over and like putting pressure on your knees is something that's not accessible for you, there's so many options on doing this like with some height and off the ground. And then here's an example with some cinder blocks, which are super inexpensive typically. You can find people giving them away for free all the time. So there we go. Lots of different ways to build a garden bed. And then here are some containers, some cedar planter, terracotta, food grade plastic. I think like some people can be wary sometimes of using plastic, but as long as it's BPA free, which I think we'll talk about in another slide, it's a great option. Plastic has such a long lifespan that like growing in it really is an option, and it's not going to deteriorate on you, especially throughout one growing season. Super mobile too, and easy to get your hands on as well. Next slide.
I saw something that was using like single-use plastic water bottles, cutting the bottoms off, flipping them upside down, and putting 1 carrot seed into it, because I know carrots are so wasteful when you have to thin them and stuff. But that's not BPA free. I don't think that those are pretty thin plastics. I feel like that is probably not a great move for anybody that's making growth. So
yeah, definitely. Or like a lot of people, a trend I've seen on TikTok is like, take a water bottle and put it over your plants with like a mini greenhouse. But yeah, again, wanting to use like making sure we're using BPA free plastic for your health and safety, because that heat is going to be like leaching out any of those chemicals in the plastic, and they'll be in the soil and the air, and all that's getting taken up by your edible plants. So make sure you're using BPA free plastic. Next one. Healthy soil choices. We'll keep going. So soil is super important. We want to think about soil as like essentially an ecosystem / like living organism. Basically when you have healthy soil, it's, combination of rock and water and air and organic material. That's what soil is. And when we buy potting mix, it has various levels of organic matter, perlite, which is creates strong drainage in potting mix. But we want to really emphasize like caring about our soil and taking care of it every year, and getting your plants set up for success through the soil. So the biggest thing with soil is drainage. When you buy potting soil, it usually has pretty good drainage. If you're doing container gardening in small pots, you can always like put some stones on the bottom of your pot. Again, making sure that you have those holes there for drainage. But soil types are made up of clay and silt and sand, all having varying degrees of drainage, with clay being really slow draining and really holding onto water, and sand not holding onto water very well at all, and silt kind of being in the middle of that. But you want a healthy combination of all three. But yeah, going to your local hardware store and purchasing an organic potting soil is great. Cedar Grove, which is through Seattle Public Utilities, is a great option. And if you go to one of their locations, they're usually doing deals like buy 3 bags, get 2 free, stuff like that. So it's always good to keep your eyes out for those, because it can very much add up very quickly. And yeah, so you want to have that, strong dynamic between types of soil, with the clay and sand, because you want it to be able to hold water and nutrients to sustain your plants, but you don't want it to hold on too much that it's not accessible, like really clay rich soils, and not hold on to it at all when it's very sandy. And we don't want to introduce toxins to our garden. So that's why you want to make sure you know where you're getting your soil from, and that it hasn't been treated with pesticides. Soil is a habitat. You're going to have like tens to hundreds of different species of invertebrates and microorganisms living in your soil. So you want to make that habitat as healthy for them as possible. You want it to be moist. You want it to have some airflow. You want it to have drainage, and you want to feed it. And the best way you can feed it is with compost. When you first are creating a raised bed, or you are using containers, I like to do like a 3-to-1 ratio of potting soil to compost at the beginning, to give to really feed those microorganisms, the fungi in the soil, the invertebrates, the worms, and the microbes that are going to be consuming the organic matter and releasing nutrients that are ultimately going to be feeding your plants. So to have healthy soil, we want to add organic compost, which is basically just organic matter, and that will release slowly over time. So you want nutrients that are not going to be quickly released, like an inorganic synthetic fertilizer, which we'll talk about a little bit further on. But you really want to be cultivating the soil in a long-term way and thinking about it as a habitat. And another way to do that is to grow cover crops in the off season. So you can, over the winter, things like Austrian field peas they will fix nitrogen into the soil. They're in the legume family. So using that, and there's many other types of cover crops that are great and all have their own benefits. But growing things in the nitrogen family is great because they will be adding nutrients to your soil, and you can do what we call chop and drop, which is where you chop it all up and then you just mix it into the soil a little bit. So then you're directly adding that organic matter that will break down slowly and also add more nutrients back into the soil. The soil is very important.
What was the crop you said? What kind of?
I said Austrian field peas. It is one variety of many cover crops. We have an article on the Garden Hotline website that's all about cover crops. And you can use vetch or barley or oats, but I typically recommend the legumes just because they do have that nitrogen fixing, where they're taking the nitrogen that's in the air and they're making it in an accessible form. They have a relationship with bacteria in the soil where it fixes the nitrogen and then makes it available for the plants. So it's just an added benefit.
Yeah, I've heard that about oats, but I have not heard the peas. And so then you wouldn't even harvest the peas. You would just mix them back into the
I don't believe that they it's not I don't think that it produces a fruit. I think it's just a wild pea, or that's a great question though. I should look into it, because
but it's like a fetch, you said, like fetch. Yeah, so it's like a pea family guy.
Yeah, it's in the pea family. And so also, like, if you're edible gardening and you're growing peas or beans, they also have that symbiotic relationship with bacteria in the soil. So you are also taking care of your soil, even though you're growing food when you do things from that family.
Nice.
So something to keep in mind when picking plants. Next slide. So when you're buying soil, you want to make sure you're buying blends that are certified organic or have certified organic ingredients. The OMRI listed symbol is great. It's very visible. It's very large usually on the bottom right corner of bags. It basically just, when it's OMRI listed, it means that it's certified for organic production. All of Cedar Grove's products are OMRI listed. You can find tons of variety at different hardware stores and local nurseries. You want to make sure you're getting potting soil for containers, just because you're basically just throwing soil into a container. So there's no, you want to make sure that that mix is really, really good at draining water from the soil. That way that you're not having all your nutrients rush out, or you're having salt accumulation because of water just flowing right through it. You want to make sure that you're using potting soil, because that's really what it's intended for, and does a great job of draining in containers. You want to avoid heavy soil mixes for raised beds. Especially if you have a mixture with a lot of clay, that clay can sometimes create a layer in your soil profile that is very hard for water to penetrate through. And so if it's at the top, your roots aren't going to be able to get it. And sometimes it's at the bottom, and then it's going to hold a lot of water at the bottom where your roots are. And then you can develop root rot in your plants, which will ultimately cause your plants and garden to not do so well. And you also want to ask questions about where materials are sourced. Are they testing for different pesticides and toxins? Where are these materials coming from? Is the soil being taken from construction sites where it's been very compacted? All that kind of stuff are good questions to ask. I talk about Cedar Grove a lot because it's it's local to us here in Washington, so it's not transferring as far. We do know where it's coming from. It's coming from our local communities. It's coming from your green food and yard waste bin is how they make their compost. So, and they're also OMRI listed, so we love to see it. Next slide. So another thing you can do, especially if you're gardening in the ground, where you're starting, or if you're using some soil that you had outside in the ground and dug up a little bit to put in a container, is to get it tested. And getting tested is really great because it kind of gives you a baseline where you're starting. The King Conservation District does soil testing for free for King County residents. You get 4 soil tests per lifetime for free as a King County resident. It's a really great tool to use. If you go online, they'll tell you exactly how to take the soil sample, and then you can either mail it down to Renton or you can drive it down, whichever is more accessible for you. And
unfortunately, some of the cities like Federal Way are not in the King County Conservation District, but there are other options too. So
Yes, exactly. Yes, thank you so much for that. I always forget about Federal Way, which is where you guys are. But yeah, so I think I never remember if it's A&I or A&L. I think it's A&I Western Laboratories is, they're like a nationwide company that does soil testing, and it's the same company that King Conservation District uses, and they have them for different regions. So that's like the Western Pacific region, and so they're like really familiar with what the soil should be like here, based on like geologic activity and history, and for us, volcanoes and glaciers, and what your soil would naturally be, and kind of compare it up to that. And the test results will tell you how much of your main nutrients, so nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, how much of your micronutrients you have, and like calcium and boron and magnesium, and your pH, and how much percentage of organic matter you have. And all of these things are really important for soil health. And then they'll also give you, ideas of how to amend it. And then typically A lot of people will actually email us at the Garden Hotline their soil testing results, so we can help you go through that and work out a plan for your garden. And it's important to do soil testing if you're living on some land that was built before the 1970s, if they had done industrial use on that site, maybe it was an old commercial orchard, garage, parking, or in the Asarco Bloom area. Is that how you pronounce that? I've never said that word out
Yes,
loud.
it's the smelter area. And so I was just going to pull up the best information that I can find for the soil testing actually goes back to the Dirt Alert program, which has to do with the education that Auburn, Federal Way, Tacoma, all of these were in the Asarco smelter region. So I'm going to put a link in the chat for that.
Great. Yeah. But yeah, so basically for a lot of these things, if it was a commercial orchard, there probably was a lot of pesticide spraying. And, you know, pesticides have changed a lot in the last like few decades. So if it's historically been used, it can be very contaminated. It can be very compacted due to garage or parking on the site. And, you know, all that kind of stuff, as Amanda was mentioning, the Asarco plume, which has a lot of like lead and arsenic and cadmium, I believe are the three main ones. And if you want to go to the next slide. So yeah, a little bit more information on it. Dirt Alert is part of King County resources it'll you know, provide you with information on how to garden when you do live in that plume region, and how to protect yourself and your family and how to do it safely. And that's why raised beds and containers are really great if you do have any kind of contamination in your soil, because it'll protect you. And you know, one of the bigger concerns, definitely uptake from the vegetables, but really one of the biggest concerns is like inhaling soil particles that are contaminated. So being able to like have grass or like a really thick layer of mulch over your yard, and then do a raised bed on top of that, there's like many layers of protection there for you and your family, and you still get to garden and be outside.
And not like one of the biggest tips they have is just taking your shoes off when you come inside, and have your pets, you know, wipe their paws as much as you can. My children don't listen, so I can't imagine that a dog would, but yeah. The idea is it's that the particulates. So yeah, it's really interesting if you haven't ever heard of this, or we have more information at the tool library too about these things. So
exactly. So it's like getting your soil tested. It's great if you are wanting to garden. It's also just great in general to get to know where you're living and better protect yourself and your family. Next slide. Healthier watering tools. So yeah, avoiding hoses with lead in them. There's soaker hoses, which are really great for doing like a deep watering in your yard. And lots of them are made from recycled tires, which is okay if you bury them, so they're not like deep in the sun and having some of those just like plastics and chemicals leaching super quickly into your soil, keeping them out of the sun. And drip irrigation is great, especially if you are a little bit limited on mobility. Then having a little bit of drip setup is great. And so yeah, here we go. You want to avoid BPA, which is bisphenol A. And then a good alternative is high density polyurethane or polyethylene. But yeah, and then this website right here has some options for purchasing these healthy tools that don't have those contaminants in them. We keep going. And healthy fertilizer choices. Yeah, so the ergonomic tools, you can use this website. It'll help you do some calculations on how much you should be lifting, or like the way you're loading different body parts. And then there's all these different examples of different shaped tools that are great for wrists and other joints. And yeah, just taking the pressure off different parts of your body, because gardening is amazing, but it definitely can sometimes hurt, and we don't want to injure ourselves. Next slide. So healthy fertilizer choices. And we'll talk about some organic versus synthetic. Keep going. So yeah, you want to be buying organic-based products, and that basically just means anything that's been made from plants or animals. So you can get things like worm castings or fertilizer made from bat or bird guano. You can get, compost is great, pure organic matter. Organic fertilizers are often made up of things like blood meal and bone meal, feather meal, alfalfa meal. And they all have varying amounts of nitrogen or phosphorus, or they promote different kinds of growth, whether that's flowering or more leafy green growth in your garden. So fish emulsion is a great, awesome fertilizer. It's what I've used on every farm that I've worked at, and full of nitrogen, gives a great boost to your plants, and is organic. So, again, with the soil test, it's great to get your soil tested because, you can over fertilize, and sometimes that can lock up nutrients. So, and make them unavailable actually to the plants. So we want to make sure that it's good to get that soil tested, know where you're starting out, and kind of figure out where you want to go. Definitely recommend fertilizing before you garden, and you can also do a second fertilizing maybe midsummer, especially if you're producing a lot and going through a couple crop rotations. So proper timing of fertilization is important. Fertilizing, it's great sometimes to fertilize a couple weeks before you even plant to kind of get feeding those microbes and microorganisms in the soil. And again, when the plant needs it, so we're not overdoing it, and we're not causing stress on our plants because the soil is very depleted of nutrients and there's not much there for them. Reading and following label instructions to make sure we're doing it correctly. Next one. Healthy pest management. So IPM, it stands for Integrated Pest Management. And basically it's learning how to take care of our gardens and manage different pests and diseases and weeds without, chemical intervention, or as very little as possible. So pesticides, all products are pesticides, even if they're certified organic. So things like neem oil or pyrethins, they're chemicals derived from chrysanthemums. Those are great, and neem oil is great too, but even if it's organic, it's still going to be toxic to insects and different amphibians and fish. So those like soapy, oily products are really harmful to soft-bodied insects. So like lady beetle larvae, which are also a really great pest, beneficial insect for pests. They consume tons of aphids, but putting like a soapy product or neem oil can be really harmful to their really delicate larval stage. And same goes for bees. And then, something that we talk about a lot at the Garden Hotline is like our greater ecosystem. So anything that you're using on your yard is going to be caught up in runoff and just drain directly to the Puget Sound, and drain directly into our waterways that are leading to the Puget Sound. So if you're using pesticides of any kind, they still do have an impact on the amphibian and fish populations. And we also have more information on integrated pest management on our website, and we can keep going. Yeah, so like I said before, IPM is a sustainable approach to managing pests by combining biological, cultural, physical, and chemical tools in a way that minimizes economic, health, and environmental risks. So it's a big combination of things. Planting plants that are going to attract beneficial insects is one of the best things you can do in your garden. So especially if you want to get into container gardening or raised bed gardening, planting plants from the mint or the aster family. So that's really like any flowering herbs like dill and fennel, cilantro, things you're going to be growing already are really great. And then things like nasturtiums are awesome, pretty easy to grow. They grow super fast. like aphids and other pests love nasturtiums. So sometimes it can be kind of sad because they'll get eaten up a bit, but it's great because it'll detract them from your edible gardening that you're doing. And it's really fun to plant edible flowers like nasturtiums, especially if you have kids in your life. Also just fun to eat flowers at any age and stage. But yeah, that's one big part of IPM prevention by planting those plants, and they'll attract beneficial insects like lady beetles and green lacewings and butterflies, things that are going to really eat pretty much any garden pest like aphids and scale, mealybugs, mites, like most of the insects that we are dealing with in our gardens, they will consume. Next slide. So yeah, prevention, great. One of the biggest things you want to do when planting your garden, mulching with wood chips or leaves, amending soil with compost. You want to remove dead, diseased plant materials. And also if you are experiencing disease in your garden, it's important to sanitize your tools, because if you are pruning something that has, say, a bunch of powdery mildew, if you don't clean those tools, which you can do with like a diluted bleach or hydrogen peroxide solution, you can spread it to the other plants in your yard, which we don't want to do.
We usually use we usually use an
Go ahead.
alcohol solution.
Oh,
is
great.
that pretty adequate? I think between the
That's
okay,
great.
cool.
Yeah. It's all great. It's all very similar. But yeah, planting a diverse garden, like I said, planting flowers, it's going to attract pollinators. If you're, growing fruiting plants, that's what you want. You want your plants to get pollinated, and we want to create habitat and support our native pollinators. And rotating crop plants. This also is great for disease prevention. Clubroot is a disease that affects brassicas, and it's really common here in the Pacific Northwest. And once you have it in your garden, it actually won't leave the soil for 7 years or so. So it's really important to rotate, and things like blossom end rot for tomatoes. Rotate those crop families. So brassicas, nightshades, all the goods, and it'll help prevent disease from really taking root and harming your plants. You also want to avoid overcrowding. Because it's such a moist environment here, fungal diseases are really common. And if we don't have enough room for airflow and circulation in your garden, then it's really easy for things like powdery mildew to just like take over. So pruning your plants and also thinning and just planting your garden. So like when you're planting for a container or a raised bed, you really want to think about what size that mature plant will be at the end, because if you're planting a kale, it's going to get pretty large, and you want to make sure that it's not going to be shading out any seedlings, which ultimately will not survive or thrive, or just like not have enough airflow in and around your plants, and fungus will take over. So you want to choose the right plant for the right place for your landscape. Make sure that if you have sun-loving crops, you're planting them in the sun. If they want part shade, giving them part shade and not full sun. If you're growing, carrots in a container, make sure that your container is like at least 12 inches tall. Or if you're planting something like peas, make sure that they have trellis to grow on. All that kind of stuff to keep in mind with what you're choosing for your garden. And you want to water properly, which we recommend in the morning. And to avoid overhead watering, this can also promote fungal growth on leaves, and it can splash up any like fungal spores that are in the soil, and they can splash up and land on the leaves, and other disease, not just fungal diseases, but different pathogens, and they can take over your plants. So we recommend, no overhead watering and watering in the morning for less drought stress. And so just really thinking about your space and what you have accessible to you. and how that's really going to be able to promote healthy plant growth and prevent any sort of disease and harm. I think that might be the last slide. Do you want to keep going? Okay, great, a couple more. Yeah, be a detective, especially as a first-time gardener. Like, don't be worried about doing things perfectly. I truly promote trying things out for yourself. If you are excited and you want to plant, you want to try to companion plant different things, go for it. See how it works out. Plant things in different places, and but also like keeping a journal or keeping some written records of what you are growing every year and what those conditions were when you planted them. And that way you can keep growing and learning every year when you come back to it, and when, you know, over the winter as you're starting to plan what you want for your garden that year, you're able to look back and see what you experienced in your garden last year. Next slide. Intervention. So yeah, part of IPM 2 is like intervening when you're having issues. And it's really important to kind of develop like a little a level of tolerance with pests, especially as an organic gardener, because, you know, this is their ecosystem as well. And even though we don't love the effects it has on our plants and the work that we're putting in for our garden, very much this is a part of it. And it's important to have some tolerance and not use really harsh chemicals, because that's going to be harmful for us, harmful for our critters in the soil, harmful for our greater and larger ecosystem here in the Pacific Northwest. Yeah, reviewing plant choice and placement, evaluating cultural conditions, you know, like mentioned in the beginning, like, how accessible is this place for me? How accessible are my plants in this place? How close is the water? Hands-on treatment. So we recommend mechanical removal for things like aphids. You can use the jet setting on your hose and it'll help spray off aphids, which is really great. Biological, again, attracting beneficial insects to your garden, and chemical as the last resort, with organic pesticides like neem oil. And neem oil is great. It's definitely last resort, but it is great for insects and fungal diseases. So it has many different benefits for your yard. Next slide. Yeah, so some examples. Watching aphids, a weed puller. And next slide.
There was a little more question about what you meant by overhead watering.
Oh, great.
Answer it, but like aiming at roots, obviously, like rain is like going to happen. You can't, you don't mean rain, like let it rain, but
yes,
if you
rain, she's doing her thing.
Right, but the settings on like a sprinkler or like a watering can, if you just get down low below the leaf cover of the plants, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And like some plants are more vulnerable than others. So like tomatoes, I would always recommend, like for me with my tomatoes, like I just take the hose or watering can, depending on what I'm using, and just put it down at the roots. Just because they can be so sensitive to fungal diseases. And things like lettuce, just water on top of it. Like you can't really get in there, especially like if you're growing lettuce that you can cut leaves off of, rather than like harvesting a whole head. It's such a dense population of lettuce leaves that like I just overhead water. Certain plants take up water really well from their leaves anyways, like lettuce, so that's totally fine. And it also, if you're doing it in the morning, it's not as big of a deal to not overhead water, just because if you do it at like when it's sunny out, it can kind of cause burn sometimes on the plants, or just like more stress in terms of them evapotranspirating, so like evaporating water and like taking water in. It can be more difficult. But yeah, chemical controls, like we said, going through this quickly, use it as a last resort, read the label, follow instructions, and be mindful of like when you're applying, because things like neem oil are only going to be beneficial to the larval stage versus like the adult insect. So that's why preventative care is super important. And next slide.
There we go.
So yeah,
I'm sorry.
that is the Garden Hotline. That's our phone number, 206-633-0224. Go ahead and give us a call. And if you want to start a garden, but you're not sure where to start, or you have the space and you're not sure how best to manage or maximize what you can do there, feel free to send us photos. I love doing that for people and talking with them, what they're looking for, what they want to grow. We can help you figure out how to do that. And we're managed by Tilth Alliance. Tilth has tons of great classes for first-time gardeners. We do them as well, like this evening, but not as frequently. And we're sponsored by Seattle Public Utilities and their hazardous waste program. So yeah.
We have a few recorded classes on our YouTube channel. This one will go on to our YouTube channel too. So Tracy put into the chat that she was feeling overwhelmed, a lot of information, and totally right. Like, this is such a great comprehensive view. It might feel intimidating to somebody that's just starting out, but it's just, work slow and take your time so that you don't feel overwhelmed. Try to enjoy the process. And then there was a question that I just am going to give my opinion answer to, which about Home Depot versus like garden centers, where to get these things. And I would say none of the above. There are a lot of people in your community that have these things, that have things that they're looking to move on. And what you can do is find containers, especially if you're starting out, if you're experimenting, instead of sinking money like we usually do into hobbies and things, like go and see if there are some free buy nothing containers out there. And then Richard mentioned we have tons of strawberries. We have tons of great things that can go in containers, like mint and strawberries, or other things that you can start out with gleaning for free, or even asking on your community online pages and stuff, what your friends even might have to start out with. And then even the dollar store has seeds that are like nasturtiums and sunflowers, and you can try things out. See, you're a scientist. You had to be a detective. I'd say it's science. You're trying. You're figuring out what works and what doesn't. And you gave some really great tips on things to avoid and to look for. So, what is your advice, Julia?
I completely agree with everything you just said. I have bought a ton of stuff from Goodwill. They even like new things, not secondhand. They do, like, in the spring have a lot of gardening supplies that are pretty inexpensive. And they have seeds as well. If you, Tilth Alliance does have their Northwest Maritime Garden Guide, which I think can be really helpful if you are looking, and maybe you guys have some at the tool library, but we have some at the office. If you ever came.
They sell them, so they're too expensive for us to really have. But yeah, there's so many. I put the link to your website too, because there's so many great guides for Garden Hotline things on there. And then it's totally worth I think it's like $18 or something. I have one. The other thing I usually suggest, which is kind of weird, but it's Farmer's Almanac. Like, if you really want to do some stuff, those farmers know their stuff, and it's almost never wrong. So that's another great way to start out. So I love that they have that at the Tilth Alliance. And then there's also the little seed library at Woodmont Garden. So Laura came down and we started some plants from their little seed library there. So there's seeds for free. And there's areas that, they can go and see the raised beds there at Woodmont Library, which is in Des Moines, and see what's growing, see how it grows, see what's it's not being exactly managed right now. It's more of a natural growing situation, but
that's great.
Yeah, it's fun.
But yeah, I definitely highly recommend getting on Facebook groups in your neighborhood. The like Buy Nothing pages, Offer Up, Next Door. Like, as for me, I'm like, I have so many half-used packets of seeds. Like, I've always given them to my friends because it's like, I already opened this bag of kale seeds. I need 4 of them. Like, please I can't grow more than 4 kales in my bed, Like, I would love to give that to somebody. And your seeds will last multiple years, but it's also, I mean, it is kind of nice to use them all up once they're open, and it's, keep them safe. But yeah, getting on Facebook, and you can ask for things, you can put out asks. Yeah, those are definitely the best places to do that. There are like Urban Feed and Beacon Hill and Swanson's and Sky Nursery in like North Seattle. I'm only really familiar with the nurseries in Seattle. Those are some great smaller businesses to support that do usually sell seeds by small seeds companies in the PNW. So if that's something you're looking to support, that's totally an option there.
There's the Coastal Farm and Ranches. There's one in Auburn, and I think there's one in Kent or something. But they have both everything from those galvanized steel drums to like baby chicks to all your soil needs, hay bales. If you want to go, get real big, or if you want to be real small, they have all the seeds, organic, different colors. I always love purples and different colors because I have children and they want to eat fun colored things, and purple is different and it cooks out, but it's the idea that it's purple when you pick it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Excited about it.
Yeah. And it's like so much information that just came out of me, and like use this as a tool to like come back to if you want, like save it if you want to learn more about soil, you want to learn more about pests and bugs and things. But like really the overarching theme is like anyone can garden, like you can garden anywhere, and you don't need to have like a ton of like skill or like extensive background knowledge. Like if you put lettuce seeds in a container and like water them, like it will grow, and you will have lettuce that you grew, and then you get to eat that lettuce, which is a really powerful experience. So I feel very passionately about anyone being able to garden, and it's really cool to learn about this stuff because it's like mind-boggling that plants even exist and grow. It like trips me out, but like you don't need to know.
Well, to go back to what you were saying about the about lettuce, and then someone else asked about like year-round planting. If you have a space in your house that you dedicate to doing just a little bit of indoor gardening, and you do sort of a rotation of things like lettuce or herbs, pretty much they stay and they come back. They're pretty hardy, but things, lettuces do not. They rocket. They like go to seed real easily if you put them outside. They like being inside, believe it or not. But it's a great way to start out to flex those muscles, and then take that soil and rotate it to something else after, a couple seasons or something. But you can definitely garden indoors in containers year round, and there's not a lot of accommodation that you have to make. Maybe a grow light in some darker months, but what would you say to somebody that wants that, like that's their goal?
Yeah, I think all of that sounds great. Definitely picking your window that's going to get the most light, because you want to maximize that heat and light that it's going to get. Herbs like cilantro and parsley can be great for inside, and the more you pick, the more it'll grow. And like lettuce too, like they can bolt really easily, so which is when they kind of go to seed. So it's great to keep them inside and keeps them a little bit happier. Smaller greens, lettuce, arugula, really great things to grow inside. And arugula, you can do this for sure in different varieties of lettuce. You can just pick little leaves off of them whenever you want a salad versus like harvesting a whole head of romaine. And those are always nice. Yeah, I think those are great for indoor gardening. More like fruiting crops don't do as well. They want more heat and light and space, but those are small and easy to do inside. You can like a lot of times you can get little like plastic coverings that are for indoor gardening that can kind of create a more humid environment. And yeah, same principles, put some compost in that soil, and like
just be wary
mentioning.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I was gonna say do grow light for sure, especially up here because it's so dark in the winter. But
I was gonna say going back to not so hot TikTok hacks of, make sure the plastics that you're using are
Mhm.
BPA free. And
Mhm.
yeah, that's really, really,
Yeah,
important.
definitely. Like getting those greenhouse tops that are for gardening are great because they're going to be typically they'll say on the label like that this is sometimes even like compostable plastic. I have one for seed starting that's compostable. But yeah, so lots of different options. Microgreens are really great too for indoor gardening. And it's like super fulfilling because you just have to sprout the seeds basically and let them grow for like 2 weeks and you're like, baby arugula, this is amazing.
I like the wheatgrass. Super
Mhm.
easy. Like, I add it to my smoothie in the morning and there's some fiber and some, vitamins that I didn't know I
Mhm.
probably needed. And it just stays a little pot in my window and it looks like a little, like a rabbit lives there sometimes.
Exactly.
But,
But yeah, I highly
well, thank you.
recommend.
Oh,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Oh, the Garden Hotline website. There's just so many articles that are really helpful and really good information. But thank you so
It's
much for
awesome.
having me.
Thank you, Julia. You are an amazing resource of knowledge and information. And I'm going to copy these links that I had it in here and just dump them all into the chat real quick. Oh, maybe. Yeah. These are some downloadable tips and tricks and things. And there's other links in there too. And yeah, thank you guys for joining us. I appreciate you. Taking the time to do this. I'm going to go ahead and just stop recording so we can maybe I can do that. I don't really know how. Let's see. There we go.